going on, everyone? Welcome back to episode 3 of the Mental Corner podcast. I've been on a little bit of a hiatus from the podcast, but now that I have some free time, I have come back. So I hope, all those viewers of mine didn't miss me too much. Currently, it is 11 p.m. on Monday, the day before this is published. And what have I done recently? All of season 1 of the H panel is filmed. Season 2 has already started filming, so kind of just been editing those videos, getting them ready to come out. Music-wise, I've been listening to Jhené Aiko's new album, Chilombo, and a lot of Drake. I'm not sure why. It's probably the warm weather, but I'm just in a really big Drake mood for some reason. Social media wise, I've gotten on all social media platforms, I think. I tried to get onto TikTok. We'll see how that goes. I'm not very good with all of that stuff, so that should be interesting. And TV wise, I'm binge watching 30 Rock and the episodes of The Last Dance with my family, the documentary with Michael Jordan. I love that stuff so much. I love basketball in general, and to see the behind the scenes, Waldo is making an appearance. Hello, sir. Waldo is my cat, for anyone who doesn't know. He likes to video and audio bomb my film sessions. Can you leave me alone for a second, boss? Go on. It's one take, no edits. All right, buddy, come on. Thank you, sir. Other than that, been biking a lot, trying to get back into shape, and now we're here. So before I start rambling too much about myself, we'll get right into the subject of today, which is panic attacks. So what are panic attacks exactly? Panic attacks are sudden episodes of intense fear, and these episodes trigger severe physical reactions when there's no real cause or real danger around to give you that kind of reaction. Some feelings that you may have during these panic attacks include losing control, having this feeling of a heart attack, or in serious cases, this feeling of dying. And some of you may be wondering, what's the difference between this and an anxiety attack? And at first, I too associated both of them as the same thing, but there are some big differences between the two of them. In an anxiety attack, the person may experience, shortness of breath, their heart racing, and severe fear. But when the cause of stress goes away, so does the anxiety attack itself. And in other words, these are very short-lived. Panic attacks, on the other hand, are unprovoked, unpredictable, and they can last a significant amount of time if they're not treated. So now that we kind of have a little background about what we're going to talk about, I'm going to get into my personal experience with panic attacks. And before I get too into my personal experience and how I dealt with it, I really want to clarify, I say this in every video, but I really want to clarify that I am not a professional, and I am solely speaking about my own experiences with these different topics of mental health. I am by no means giving advice. I am by no means giving you a cookie cutter kind of plan to deal with these mental issues. I am solely speaking on my past experiences and what has worked with me. So now that I've kind of made that clear, my family likes to remind me to make that clear. Now that I've kind of, addressed that, we'll get right into it. So, before university, I didn't really acknowledge panic attacks as a thing. And I think I had, if I can remember right, I had my first acknowledged panic attack in my first year of varsity swimming at Guelph. I was about to go in for practice, but I kind of just broke down in the change room. I couldn't really catch my breath. I was shaking uncontrollably. My face felt really flushed, and I started to feel like, I was going to have a heart attack. Obviously, it was just an increase of heartbeat, but it felt so severe that it felt like I was going to have a heart attack. And I kind of had to sit down on the bench in the change room so that, because I was going to fall over and I didn't want to hurt myself. And I didn't really end up swimming that day. A senior swimmer found me in the change room and kind of, reassured me that everything was going to be okay, and then kind of told me to, leave, take the day to myself, because I had already been through a lot, so that I didn't end up swimming that day. And that was not the only panic attack I experienced through university. I had many other panic attacks. There were some swim practices where, I had to get out early because they would happen mid-practice. I would be swimming without any issue, and then like completely unprovoked, this panic attack would present itself, and it would get so bad that I would have to hang on the wall several times, like with every bit of strength I had just to stay above the water. There were other times where we would be doing like all out swims, and I would go and do a 50 all out, which is 2 lengths of the pool as fast as you can. And once I hit the wall, it felt like my heart was giving out, and I had to like be carried out of the pool and kind of lie on the pool deck because my heart was just racing way too much. And yeah, so that yeah, I forget what I was going to say there. Yeah, so these are just some instances. Obviously, I had way more, and they weren't just all at the pool. It's just my most severe ones were at the pool, and those are the ones I kind of remember. So how did I deal with them? There's some techniques I used and tips I was given from people who had previously experienced similar situations that I kind of used for myself and kind of really helped with me. So I'm going to get kind of into how I dealt with my panic attacks. And like I said before, I'm not a professional. These techniques may have helped me, but they may not help everyone. I'm simply speaking from my past experience. Want to make that crystal clear for you guys before I get right into it. So, excuse me. So obviously different situations kind of led to different approaches towards calming myself down when these attacks would happen. Dealing with them was very similar when I was alone compared to when other people were present. The only difference really was, for me personally, people being there was kind of a problem in my own head. And that problem was, the embarrassment factor. So what I mean by this is, I get incredibly embarrassed and hard on myself. And I get really embarrassed and hard on myself when people are watching me while I try to calm down. Because in my own head, I've got like this little voice talking to me, saying like everyone's watching and judging me, when in reality, most of the time, it was just me judging myself. The people around me were not judgmental about, me going through these panic attacks. It was really just myself being hard on myself and kind of pretending that everyone else thought the same as I did. So when other people were around, it was especially hard for me because I felt like I was alone while I was going through it, when, in reality, that was never the case. So the first thing I did, when I so obviously like before, when I wouldn't acknowledge these panic attacks, I kind of just wanted to be by myself and kind of suppressed the feelings that I was getting as they were coming up, which is not healthy. It kind of actually made the situation worse. So now, or at least in the last year or so, when my peers were around and I felt the panic attack coming, the first thing I would do is let them know. Like I said, a big mistake I used to do is try and fight my panic attacks before they'd happen. I wouldn't tell anyone they were going to happen. And if I did tell people, I told them to leave me alone because I could deal with it by myself. All this really did was kind of make the panic attack I was having worse. And it would catch my peers completely off guard in a situation where they could have potentially been incredibly helpful if they had just, been informed of the situation I was going into. So, after a couple instances where I kind of felt alone and I was dealing with things alone, and I realized like suppressing these feelings and not acknowledging them was not the way to go. The first thing I decided to do whenever I felt that way was to let the people around me know, so they could not only be in the loop, but kind of like realize what's going on and not and act accordingly. And it really helped. My peers were always there for me. Like the swim team was there for me. My coach was there for me. My family, my friends. Like when I let them know, there was no judgment like I thought in my head there would be. There was simply support and kind of just reassurance that I wasn't alone in the process. So it definitely helped a lot, having that be the first thing to do in that instance. And then after letting them know, I would try to sit down or lie down regardless of where I was. I didn't care, if I was right outside my classroom. I didn't care if I was in the middle of the, what's it called? The courtyard of Guelph. I didn't care if I was just at home or at the pool or anywhere. I didn't care who was there or where I was. I tried to, sit down or lie down. It didn't matter. I'm fortunate enough that, the majority of my unprovoked panic attacks have always been in areas where sitting and lying down is achievable. In areas where it may not have been, I probably would have tried to find a wall or something to lean on, just something where my body feels relaxed and I don't feel like I'm using more energy than I have to. Because when you're having a panic attack, even standing up, like just keeping yourself straight up, balanced, feels like a lot of energy being used. And you don't want to feel that way, especially when the world's spinning and your heart is just racing. So, once I was sitting or lying down, I would close my eyes and take deep breaths. For me personally, the most effective breathing pattern I have is 5 seconds in, 5 seconds holding it in, and then 10 seconds releasing. This is kind of the breathing pattern that I've had the most success with in calming down. And it's not only helped me in panic attack situations, it's also helped me like before a race, when I'm getting too hyped up or I'm getting too nervous. It's helped me before tests and exams. It's helped me before, big job interviews, helped me before just all these different aspects in my life. It's helped me. So that's kind of the breathing pattern I stick to because it's worked. And then as I'm breathing, the most important thing for me, like I've said before, is to acknowledge that this panic attack is happening. I never used to. And this is kind of a trick that I started using after my therapist at university taught me. And I'll get more into that, in weeks to come. But, she kind of explained that acknowledging what's happening, even if you don't think it'll help, helps so much. It helps me realize what I need to do and how to calm myself down rather than ignore the problem and try to keep going as it's happening. Because, like I've said before, in previous instances, that has never helped. A big tell for me when I was about to have a panic attack, which is, you look for the signs before it happens, because once you start to feel it, then you can act accordingly. So a big tell for me was serious dizziness. Once I felt this, I would look at my hands for any telltale signs, and before any panic attack I've experienced, my hands would shake uncontrollably and I would feel almost unable to move at all. So once these three things were happening, I kind of realized what was going on, I acknowledged it, and I acted accordingly. Finally, after opening my eyes, the major thing that I do to calm myself down is a series of grounding techniques. On the H panel, my friend Riley came on and he discussed grounding techniques and mindfulness practices that have helped him. And I personally have found that we have very similar practices, and for me anyway, they have really worked. So the major grounding technique that has always helped me without fail is the 5 senses grounding technique. Really, Waldo? My cat again. Just interrupting everything. He's got to be the center of attention at all times. Where was I? Sorry. Yeah. Okay. So the major grounding technique that I found has always helped me without fail is the 5 senses grounding technique. So this one was showed to me by my varsity coach, Shantique Payne. Huge shout out to her. And it's always helped me calm down. So in this exercise, you stimulate all 5 senses so that you can ground yourself and kind of bring you back into the present. Because as you're having a panic attack, or as you're, kind of even anxiety attacks, you're not in the present. Like, you're stuck in your head. So these grounding techniques really help bring you back into the present so you can work accordingly and you can kind of get back into reality. So firstly, using my sight, I acknowledge 5 things around me that I see. After that, secondly, I acknowledge 4 things that I can touch around myself. In a panic attack, sometimes I personally feel immobile. So in this instance, what I try to do is feel my body touching the ground or the heartbeat in my chest, because realistically, without moving, those are the only things I can feel. And once I feel that, I acknowledge 3 things I can hear. The one sound that always calms me down is the sound of the pool. And, as a swimmer, despite being emotionally and physically destroyed by the pool every day of my career, that seems to be the top noise that helps me ground almost immediately, which seems kind of weird to someone who isn't in the sport, but I feel like a lot of swimmers can relate to that. Even if you don't enjoy the sport that much, closing your eyes and hearing the sound of the pool, the sound of people in the pool, it's just really soothing. In some instances where I'm mid-practice and I have a panic attack, the one thing I do is I'll go to a side lane and I'll put my whole body underwater for 30 seconds at a time, taking in the noises and feeling the weight of the water above me. So if I'm not on the deck or I'm not in some other area, this always works. Fourthly, I acknowledge 2 things I can smell. And then finally, they suggest acknowledging 1 thing you can taste, but I personally have never used this step because the only thing I really taste is, saliva, and that it's hard to acknowledge anything else. And I don't really find that step, for me personally anyway, is very effective. So I kind of just forget that part of the entire grounding technique. But in a summary, so the 5 are 5 things you can see, 4 things you can touch, 3 things you can hear, 2 things you can smell, and then 1 thing you can taste. And, doing this grounding technique, not just once, but repeatedly while you're having this panic attack, can help ground you and help bring you back to the present. And it's worked without fail for me in many instances, especially this year. It has been very useful, and I definitely recommend that to anyone who's kind of going through a similar situation. So to kind of wrap this episode up, one big thing I want my listeners to take from this episode, like I said, I'm not a professional, but if there's one thing I want you guys to take after listening, is to be kind to yourself if you experience panic attacks. They are terrifying. Feeling out of control of your own body is easily one of the most terrifying feelings out there. And afterwards, you just feel absolutely drained. And in some cases, it took me hours to recover just from one panic attack. Like, I felt absolutely drained when these things happened. My energy was at an all-time low. Before I really took proper care of myself, I would have panic attack, brush it off, and I'd go back to training hard or go about my day-to-day life, which ultimately led to another more severe panic attack shortly after. The best way to deal with these panic attacks, unfortunately, I know it's rough, but the best way to deal with it is to deal with them head on. But the key is to not be embarrassed or ashamed of it. You have no control. Acknowledge it, do the grounding techniques or the calming exercises that work for you personally. A panic attack does not make you any less of a person, and it certainly doesn't make you any weaker or lower than anybody else. Another thing to recognize is that you are definitely not alone in this situation, like I told myself repeatedly before I went to get help. A website called newharbinger.com reports that many people will experience a panic attack in their lifetime. Approximately 1 to 2% of the general population will suffer from a panic disorder, and approximately 5% of the world population in any given year will experience a panic disorder. And now those numbers may seem small, but if you take into consideration that these percentages are based on a population of almost 8 billion, they're really not as small as you think, and you're really not as alone as you think. So in conclusion, kind of in a nutshell for anybody who skipped through the entire long explanation, panic attacks are terrifying, but the stigma around them needs to come to an end or needs to change bad. You're not insane if you experience panic attacks, and you aren't weak if you acknowledge them and try to take care of yourself. Furthermore, you aren't weak for taking time to yourself after one of these happens to try and bring yourself back to 100%. You need to take the time after. You need to take the time to heal yourself, to better yourself, and just know that you're not alone in this process. And that's kind of all I have for you guys today. Thank you again for tuning in. I really appreciate it. I'm new to this whole podcast. Whoa, voice crack there. I'm new to this whole podcast thing, but with the reception I've been getting, I really appreciate it. For more episodes like this, please like, comment, and subscribe to my channel. Turn the notifications on. I will see you guys in 2 weeks.